everything feels futile and often very hopeless. And I don't think I know anyone. I'm not sure that maybe I know some people who haven't told me, but I don't know that I know anyone who hasn't been depressed for at least part of the last year or so, and for a lot of the last 4 years, and that's for obvious reasons, right? Because we face a human future that is that has such bleak possibilities in stretching out in front of us, right? I mean, the threat of global climate catastrophe. I'm sure in Palm Beach, this is a huge part of what you think about and discuss as socialists, because it affects you so much regionally. And of course the escalating threat of military and nuclear catastrophe, right? There are these existential threats to the human species, and capitalism seems more entrenched than ever, but also more vulnerable than ever. And it's very, we start in a very confusing and difficult place, but in part it's difficult and scary because we also feel, certainly there's been a change over the course of my lifetime in terms of how you feel almost more frightened because it feels more possible to do something about it. And what I mean by that is, I remember when I was younger. I'm 31 now, so I've been a kind of leftist for 12, 13, I mean, since high school. And we were always so marginal. We were always, the left in this country during the 1980s, 1990s was just squeezed to the fringes and just wasn't part of the debate. And I did a book about Bill Clinton that involved going back through a lot of the 90s newspaper archives and reading what was going on and what the discourse was. And it really is kind of shocking how there was a complete consensus around views that it seems so extremely far to the right. I mean, the entire Democratic Party was on board with the position, well, we have to find a way to cut welfare, right? This is the mainstream, and the debate is, how do we cut welfare? Do we cut welfare? Do we just cut welfare, or do we find a way to send people to work? This is like where the policy discussion was. So in some ways, I mean, I know that we often feel as if things only get worse, they never get better. In some ways, things have obviously gotten better because we are here, right? There are these vibrant DSA chapters all around the country. It is one of, if not the most important political organization in the country at the moment. I mean, I don't say that as flattery, I say that as fact, right? Which is that socialists are driving the discourse. We have noticed, there have been all these headlines you might have seen recently saying, oh, Joe Biden, he's turning out to be more progressive than people thought. Well, a lot of it is theater, but it's notable that the Biden administration does feel a need to quell left discontent. I think that we can say is true. There's a lot of cynicism about, well, how are we, before the election, some of us were saying, well, we're going to have to, unfortunately, now that we're stuck with Joe Biden, we're going to have to try and push him to the left. And people say, well, how can you push him to the left? He's a conservative. He always bragged over the course of his career that he was a conservative. And that is true, right? But what we are seeing is that there is a growing left influence over that mystical thing called the discourse. And I think it is true that we are succeeding in pushing things onto the agenda that were not on the agenda. And it's often difficult to draw a cause and effect relationship between things that we do and things that happen in the world. But I will say, if you go back 10 years ago, you look at the discussion, go back to even the 2016 Or go back to 2012, 2008, go back to the debates and look at how much climate change was being talked about. The answer is very, very little, right? The Obama administration, despite the Paris Agreement, felt very little need to make climate change a priority because nobody was making a noise. Right? And so they were perfectly content not to bring it up because it's an issue that requires a difficult political fight against many powerful established interests. And they didn't have much interest in doing that just to, you know, save humanity and the planet or whatever. But now, you know, General Motors just announced that they're going to switch to all electric cars. Well, we could say, again, we as socialists tend to be pretty cynical, and you know, we could say, well, we'll believe it when we see it. But it is important that we understand that we are the reason why lots of things happen in the world, even if it's rarely acknowledged. So to the extent that the Biden administration feels a need to use more progressive rhetoric, to the extent that they feel a need, you know, Joe Biden is now on the defensive net, now promising he won't further cut the stimulus payments. Well, why? It's in part because we are succeeding in making people angry and in raising people's expectations and making them feel like they deserve more than they are getting. One of the most successful political movements in recent history has been the Fight for 15. Millions upon millions, it's tens of millions of people who are now covered by a $15 minimum wage already at the state level and in cities who weren't. And the reason they are covered is because there was a fight for 15. When the Fight for 15 started, it was considered a pipe dream. It was more than double the existing federal minimum wage. Now, again, you know, the Democrats have proposed it's not going to come in until 2025. But the point is that it's now the official Democratic Party position that we have to get to a $15 minimum wage federally eventually. Well, that is a startling development, but it's not occurring because of pure benevolence on the part of the Democratic Party. It is occurring because there is a fight, because left activists all over the country have succeeded in making people that feel that they deserve more. You've seen this union election that is taking place for Amazon now. You know, we don't know the outcome yet, I don't think, but it is certainly the case that there are labor struggles that have succeeded that I think would have failed 10 years ago, right? Kickstarter unionized last year, one of the first of the tech companies to unionize. I happen to be a little bit involved with that, organizing the creators of Kickstarter projects to help support the union. Our magazine got started on Kickstarter. And, you know, so when they started unionizing, we got lots of the project creators to essentially threaten that we wouldn't create projects on Kickstarter anymore if they didn't recognize their union. Well, they did recognize their union, but they were dead set against it. And they recognized the union in part because among the generation of people of young people who work at Kickstarter and who create projects on Kickstarter, being anti-union is toxic. And the company understood that it became in its interest because organizers and activists and workers made it in the company's interest to recognize the union. So they fought like hell, and they didn't do it out of any benevolence. They tried very, very hard to squeeze the union out, but ultimately they realized, sorry you're going, thank you for coming, Johanna. So they realized it would be in their interest to recognize the union. And I think that is going to occur. We have to keep, we have to keep raising people's expectations and making them feel like everyone deserves to have a union. Everyone who doesn't have a union is being deprived of something that is their fundamental right. And the more that sort of consensus develops, again, it's a squishy thing, because when we talk about like raising class consciousness and getting people changing public understanding, it is often difficult to quantify your success and to know when how far you've succeeded in moving the needle. But we can see particular things that say that we're going in the right direction. Again, the spread of the $15 minimum wage is a very, very obvious example of something like that. Of course, we've also lost big battles in California. There was proposition, whatever it was, the independent contractor, making sure that gig economy workers could be kept as independent contractors. Proposition 22, thank you. Couldn't be kept, didn't have to be paid full benefits. And of course, there was a massive hundreds of millions of dollars campaign, Uber Eats and we're, making sure restaurants were giving out bags that say, to vote, to try and make sure that they didn't have to pay their workers benefits, right? They had to do, but even though we lost, the important thing is it required hundreds of millions of dollars by the companies, which indicates that they were in fact scared, right? They were overturning a law that had passed democratically, and they panicked, and they exercised corporate power because they knew that this was a serious threat, right? So even when we lose and we can say, my God, unfortunately, like we lost the battle, this is terrible, they did have to bring a phenomenal amount of they put everything into it because they understood that it posed a serious risk to their power over workers and therefore to their business model. So we do, the rising left movement, I think this is one of the things I try and tell DSA chapters wherever I go, is that, even when you lose, you are posing a threat, and we are, a rising political force in this country. It is notable. I think a lot of us, I'm sure a lot of people in this chapter, after Bernie Sanders lost the primary and we stuck with Joe Biden, a man who spent his career opposing everything Bernie Sanders stood for, I'm sure a lot of us were very, very depressed. I felt very directionless because the Bernie campaign was something we could really, it was a very obvious thing to focus on, a very obvious thing to put our energy into, where now there's a real sense of, well, where do we go, what do we do, what do we put our energy towards? But it is notable, and we do deserve to sort of pat ourselves on the back a little bit, that a socialist nearly won the Democratic primary twice in a row. Well, that's historically unprecedented. It really is historically unprecedented, and it happened because of organizing. It happened because people are out making it happen. And they did see a need to, Biden was notably resistant during the general election towards making concessions towards the left. But they do seem to be trying a little harder at the moment, not in their appointments, but in terms of the appearance. They're trying to create the appearance of being progressive. Because there is an understanding that the American people, American popular opinion is turning somewhat progressive and there is a risk of greater political radicalism and a threat to the status quo. And so, Joe Biden actually was forced into a position in the general election of defending the Green New Deal. He said he opposed it, but then he had to make a bunch of concessions to the Sunrise Movement. And again, we can be cynical, but also I think we should give credit to the Sunrise Movement. They've been phenomenally successful at confronting politicians. And there was the Massachusetts Senate race where Ed Markey had never really been that much of a progressive, but he branded himself as a progressive when he was threatened with losing re-election. And he had to pretend AOC was his best friend. And she managed to extract concessions and managed to be and she has managed to be a political power broker in many ways. She drives the political conversation. Fox News can't shut up about her. They're putting her agenda on the screen and going, look at all these terrible things like free housing and free healthcare. But it is forcing them. For a long time, the American right had put us on the defensive. And now it is going a little bit in the opposite direction. We are I think we should consider ourselves to be at the very beginning of something, rather than at the end of something. And so there is a reason that the victories are small. There is a reason that we still mostly lose. And the reason is that we are just at the beginning, that there has been no socialist movement in this country for a very, very long time. And it is now beginning to get together. But you know, I went to, and some of you may have gone to the DSA convention in Atlanta, I think now nearly 2 years ago. And, you know, what was so phenomenally striking to me at the time, just seeing it as an outside observer, was how professional and organized that convention was. And it made me feel like, in a way that I hadn't for a long time, that, you know, socialism was a mainstream, this was a mainstream political tendency. These are people who are dedicated, smart and hardworking, which, you know, that there have always been a lot of dedicated, smart and hardworking people on the left. But, you know, they really pulled off something incredible, and you really felt like, wow, this is a group that could win. This is a group, and every time I go to DSA chapters, I meet people who are doing work where I don't feel like, as I felt, you know, as a younger person on the left, where I always felt, well, it feels like what we're doing is futile. It now feels more like, well, what we're doing is extremely difficult, but it's not necessarily futile. It is a problem, and it has been, I mean, really hurt the course of the last year, of course, by the pandemic, because activism and organizing are so heavily built on in-person work that, you know, you can imagine a sort of greater blow right as we had all just as we've been getting going, but, you know, the organization has proved very resilient. I'm sure that you have had the same difficulties everyone around the country has had in maintaining your infrastructure, despite being on Zoom like this. And I wish, you know, we could all be in a room together right now. I'd love to come to Palm Beach, but the organization has been remarkably resilient, because this is not a fad. This is not something that is passing. This is a greater understanding on the part of millions and millions of people of, you know, of how capitalism works, of fundamental flaws with it, and a determination that we absolutely have to alter certain features of our political system, economic system, and society, and that's sort of non-negotiable because of the position we're in. You know, the old dichotomy, socialism or barbarism, really does seem to be that much more true and powerful in the age of climate catastrophe, and in the age where we see a far right that is more unhinged than ever before, more sort of openly fascistic, pardon me, than ever before. And that is powerful, right? I mean, Donald Trump lost re-election, but I still very strongly believe that Donald Trump could have won re-election if he'd handled the coronavirus with even somewhat, with even a moderate level of competence and compassion. That's not in him, of course, so he did not, and it was a catastrophe, and he was voted out of office, but not by the kind of margin that you can really be comfortable with. Right? I mean, more people voted for him this time than I believe than last time. Millions of new people voted Republican who didn't vote Republican in 2016, and so that's rather terrifying. And I think that if the Biden administration, of course, is discredited and does a poor job, which we can expect it might, there's no reason to think that the far right couldn't have be on the march again very, very soon, despite we saw obviously the raid on the Capitol was an alarming example of what of just how many, just how menacing and threatening the American right can be. So there's a lot to fear. But there is a lot of good work to be done, and I would love to hear from all of you, what your chapter has been doing about how you approach these questions locally of what it means to be a socialist in a particular place, how you reconcile sort of national versus local issues to work on, especially now that, as I say, the Bernie campaign is over. So I'm happy to talk to you about anything that you would like to know from me. I have things I can tell you about left publishing and writing. I can offer speculations about certain things politically, but yeah, I mean it's you all, it's DSA organizers who are doing the truly important work. And as I say, I think one thing that I want to leave you with, I joined DSA myself a few months ago. So I used to say, as a non-member, I'd like to tell you this, but now I am a member. So I tell you this as a comrade, is, one thing I would like to emphasize to you is just how important what you are doing is. I think it is the most important work that anyone can be doing right now. I think I think that if the United States has a viable and just future ahead of it, it will, the route to that runs at least in part through the DSA, because who else is there, right? I mean, there are no other mass membership left organizations with anything like the kind of power. And we've seen that, there are so many now elected DSA officials all around the country, and they are doing work that is paying off in some ways and has a lot of promise. So, things have never been more bleak. They're bleak when the pandemic hit. Obviously, we may now see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but the pandemic certainly has demoralized a lot of us and made it harder to get out of bed in the morning, unless we, and of course, I'm sure some of you have been forced to work unsafe jobs and gone through really horrific torments, because this is just a time of such immensely greater suffering than we even had before. God knows we had plenty of it before. But the thing I would say is, despite the seeming this bleakness and hopelessness, what you're doing matters, and it is really great. I know how difficult it can be to just muster the energy to keep showing up to meetings, to keep doing work that is unpaid and is tough, and that involves, trying to get a lot of strangers who don't know each other and who all have different ideas and, who all have a basic commitment to left values, but very different understandings of what that means, to try and hash out all these differences, to try and keep an organization that, has existed for many years, but has never existed at this level of participation, to try and get it to function effectively. I mean, everything you are doing is extremely difficult, perhaps even impossible, but truly, truly important. And so, thank you for your work, and I'm happy to talk to you about anything you like. And I apologize again for being late.
I guess we'll just jump into Stack if that's cool for questions. I actually am the first person in Stack. Thank you, Nathan Robinson, for joining us today, for sharing. That was great. As a cynical leftist, especially right now, it can be tough. As you said, the far right has had a resurrection. We've seen in several countries, from Bolsonaro to Trump to other elected leaders. My question is actually more towards, you talked about the discourse being pushed to the left. And I would agree, we've had, they've had to make concessions for the left, which is a good thing. But my question is, how would you speak to rainbow capitalism, things of that nature, where corporations are preying on marginalized communities under the guise of, being supportive?
Yeah, it's really ugly. That is a really ugly tendency of corporations to realize that a very cheap way to deflect attention from their crimes is for, say, Raytheon or Lockheed Martin to have. In fact, all the worst companies have love to boast of their commitment to diversity. Right? They all it's really pernicious because it offers you a cruel kind of option, because you don't want to say, you can't say that it's hard to say that that's bad, because we have this article, this great article by Yasmin Nair and Eli Massey in Current Affairs called "Inclusion in the Atrocious," where they actually start with the issue of transgender people in the military, because they say, on the one hand, you can't oppose inclusion, right? You can't say we'd rather have a white supremacist institution. On the other hand, you have the idea of, as I say, inclusion in the atrocious, of legitimizing this imperialist institution and allowing it to look better. This is like renaming all the Confederate bases, right? You go, on the one hand, well, yeah, they're all these bases are named after white supremacists. On the other hand, well, you're gonna name a base after like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and then now, people don't see the institution for what it is. It's a way of covering up their crimes. It's very, very, so it puts you in this very difficult position. But I think we as socialists have a good response to it, which is to call out what it is. It's very important to show people what the difference between superficial attempts at performing racial and economic justice are, versus real and authentic racial and economic justice. And I think it is part of our job because there is this effort by incredibly powerful people to confuse, to make it look like, and this is one of the things we're really going to have to watch out for with the Biden administration, because they are going to perform progressivism, and a lot of people are going to say, wow, look at how progressive the presidency is, but then so for example, I think they appointed, they'll appoint someone to the Department of Homeland Security who is an immigrant, and they'll say, we have the first immigrant head of the Department of Homeland Security. And you're thinking, well, okay, but it's our job as socialists to draw attention to what the Department of Homeland Security does, and to take the attention away from personalities and towards institutions and power. And helping people understand how power operates is our job. And I think once you do, then you're not fooled by changing who holds power rather than how it's wielded. And so, you talk about rainbow capitalism, is a great term, and we all understand these things. And as I say, it's our job to have a deep understanding of this and to show other people. Well, whether we can, I don't know. Yeah, as I say, we're making the effort to, part of being a socialist, I think, is helping clarify the world, the secret, not the secret, because it's quite open, the open workings of power, but articulating. Socialists are all very articulate and clear, and they give people the revelation as to what is really going on in a situation. When things, the fact that your boss is pretending to be your friend, but they're not really your friend. And once you see it, once anyone is told that and they see it, they're not going to be fooled again. But they might be fooled if they don't have a socialist friend who is there to point out what is really, really going on.
Thank you, Nathan Robinson. Next on Stack, we have Milo.
Hello, Milo.
Hi, Nathan. I have a question, kind of in the realm of how left-wing media works. And so I was just going to say, that obviously recently with, Current Affairs and Jacobin, we've seen left media kind of break out of its hyper minimal market it had.
Yeah.
It's kind of broken out of people, because back in the day it would be a Trotskyist newspaper they would hand out at the subway station, and now we have we have these good-looking magazines that are, you know, widely read in certain circles. And so I was wondering, you know, we've managed to break out of the Trotskyist newspaper selling method, but how can we break out of maybe the boutique magazine world that we have right now, which is definitely an improvement.
And I mean to say nothing unkind about the Trotskyist newspapers, because there was something very alive about left. You know, I certainly always did prefer to find a leftist in the subway station handing out a cheap newspaper than no leftist at all. But it's true that there has been this kind of, I don't want to call it professionalization, because that has the connotations that I don't really like. But you know, as you say, there are these really well-produced, you know, the podcast world as well has just phenomenal. At the end of so this book, Why You Should Be a Socialist, that I did, the last chapter is all these left media things, and it's all writers and podcasters and things to follow. And the list, as I was compiling it, is just very, very long. Yeah, I mean, I think about the question you ask is one I think about every day, because I'm the editor of one of these left magazines. You know, even though we are more, and this tells you how small we were for a long time, is that Current Affairs has 6,000 subscribers, right? Which is nothing. And yet we are one of the largest leftist magazines in the country. So it's still very, very small. We have a lot more readers than print subscribers. Jacobin has I think about 10 times what we have. They're much bigger. But even Jacobin, right, with 60, 70, 80,000 people, is still nothing compared to, you know, the New Yorker, right? It's a small fraction. And even the New Yorker, right, is a small percentage of the population as a whole. In the early 1900s, the leading socialist newspaper, The Appeal to Reason, had 400,000, a circulation of 400,000 at its height. And the country was much smaller. So we are not even close to what The Appeal to Reason was doing in the early 1900s. Now, of course, you know, newspapers were the only way to read back then, so it's a little different. You can't really compare. But I think the next task really is, as you say, you know, how do we have the reach of an NPR or MSNBC or New York Times without compromising any of our values? And it's a slow process of institution building. We're working on it. I mean, I know that Jacobin is working on it, and I know that we are working on it, and I know that a lot of other people, the Real News Network is doing a great job. And it's also frightening because the right-wing media ecosystem is vast and has so much money and so much reach. I mean, the amount that even successful left books sell compared to what successful conservative books sell is just, again, a tiny, tiny fraction. The answer to how, I don't really know, except to say slowly and through focusing on just every day working on trying to put out things that are high quality and that people can read. One of the things that we try and do is, and I think one of the keys is that the left has to put out things that are readable and enjoyable to a mass audience. So, you know, I try and only write things that my relatively apolitical parents can read and enjoy, because I want us to be able to reach people who aren't necessarily leftists already. So one of the keys is we have to make media for leftist media for non-leftists. Because if we don't have leftist media for non-leftists, then the media isn't growing the left. And media is a very crucial way of growing a political tendency. And the conservatives understand that. They have all these fake think tanks, all these publications, they churn out books. And the books, conservative books, I have to say, because I read a lot of them, are very good. They're not good in terms of being correct, but they're good in terms of they're actually very clearly written, clearly argued. You read it and they are masterpieces of propaganda. and that can reach a mass audience. And so I think the number one thing I'd say is, even though we don't know how we're going to get there, I mean, our publication grows a little bit every year, is we're not going to get there unless we think all the time, how do we reach people we are not reaching right now?
Thank you. We have Anand, pardon me, next on stack.
Hi, Nathan. So I just want to preface my question, a little background on. So earlier today, we were talking about the issue of if there are a particular difficulty we face here in Florida, especially South Florida. Yeah. And there's, a narrative that's emerged that there's a large anti-communist sort of voting bloc of mostly Cuban Americans and more recently Venezuelan Americans. And here in Florida, Biden, he lost the electoral. He lost the vote in Florida, and Democrats lost a lot of down ballot races. And the narrative emerged that socialism was the reason, the association with socialism. And most recently, we tried to host a municipal candidate forum, and several people backed out. And even one of them called me and said, "Oh, I'm totally left wing. I totally support what DSA is doing. I love you guys, but I just can't have that socialist label stick to me."
Wow.
So I was wondering, do you think, since you've been around the country and talked to other chapters, do you see this hostility from the Democratic establishment as unique, or is this common throughout the country? And how do we deal with it? How do we deal with this reemergence of red baiting right as we're growing?
Yeah, Florida has, I think Florida has this problem almost worse than anywhere. I think it is definitely at its worst in Florida. As Nick just pointed out in the chat, of course, that the Fight for 15 won. So it is true that I think the word socialism is more of a problem in Florida than almost anywhere else, but I don't think, because socialists are talking about things that benefit, that are just of obvious benefit to workers everywhere, I don't think there is a difference between the ultimate possibility of the ideas of socialism appealing to people in Florida than elsewhere. It is more, is there a harder PR problem in Florida than elsewhere? And we don't, as socialists and people who feel that term is important, I have always defended. I often get, not at DSA meetings, but when I do other talks, I get people going, well, why do we have to use the word? Can't we just find a new word, a different word that doesn't have the connotations? And I feel like in Florida that might be more tempting than anywhere else, because the word, just the word, is causing you a lot of headaches that you probably if you hadn't had the word socialism, that person would have participated in the thing. But the reason we can't give up the term is because socialism has such a rich and great tradition, and part of our job is to explain what it means and what it is. And of course, if you tried to ditch it, all you would do is have people pointing at you and going, well, what you're describing is socialism, and then you're back to, yes, it is, I'm actually a socialist. So there's no real option. I don't know quite how to deal with the Florida problem, because I think it is less of a problem elsewhere, right? Especially in places that have a historical socialist tradition, like the Midwest has, Milwaukee had an openly socialist mayor for 25 years, considered one of the most successful mayors in the country. So in a place like that, you can go, well, we had socialist governance. Whereas in Florida, as you say, there are a lot of people who have lived under governments that call themselves socialist, and of course all the people who end up coming here are the exact people who would detest those governments. So you have a very unrepresentative population spreading lies about what socialism is, which is a huge difficulty. as I say, you're stuck in a bind, but all I can think is that, you know, our job is to come up with clear and persuasive explanations of what we believe, why we believe it, and why the things that people say against us are not true. And we might want to lead with more of the description of the ideas than with, you know, just repeating the word socialism, because we know that, you know, if you remember when Bernie Sanders went on Fox News to an audience and he was like, let me explain to you what democratic socialism means to me. And he explained it, and then the Fox News audience is all going, that sounds amazing. And that's a really hostile environment. So I don't think you should give up, but I do think it's probably true that you face worse obstacles on this front in South Florida than you do almost anywhere else in the country. But the only encouraging thing about that is that it means that it's as bad as it gets where you are. It doesn't get worse than that. So if you can overcome it, if you can find ways to talk to people that get them past the word, you know, you'll do okay.
Thank you. We have Matthew next on Stack.
Hi, Nathan. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey.
Hi. So, you know, reading the introduction of your book, it was really exciting to see how you started the magazine, how you got everything going on, sitting there in the cafe on your computer playing with InDesign. And I was wondering if you have any advice for a budding leftist journal publisher.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Is there any particular thing? Because I have like a 2-hour lecture I could do on this. So.
No, just your general thoughts. I guess the concise.
Yeah. Okay.
Primer to your idea.
Okay, well, there are a couple things. There are a few things. So the good news is people say publishing is very difficult. It is very difficult. It requires a lot of work, but it can be done. The crowdfunding model is actually very, very good because small amounts of money from people add up really, really, really fast. So as I say, we only have 6,000 print subscribers, but they pay $60 a year. $60 a year is only $5 a month. You get a few thousand people paying $5 a month. You're bringing in revenue of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And of course, that can pay. We just expanded from 2 staff, which we had last year, to 5 full-time staff, which we have this year. Which is great. And it's all because, so we don't do advertisers. I think advertisers really compromise you, and they put you in a position where if you lose your advertising, you're really stuck. I think the model of build a small, committed, paying audience that can sustain you is really, it works very, very well. And that's the magazine subscription model that we go on. That is the Patreon model, the Substack model. It's build a small audience. Now, how do you build that kind of, so once you've done that, you're really sustainable. And you have people who are, you don't need that many people, but they need to be paying a small amount of money regularly to help keep you going. We don't have any large donors. We don't have any investors. You know, nobody gives us thousands of dollars. People give us $5 a month. So you got to build an audience. And to build an audience, I think the key is to get, put out just the best things you can. Just really focus on giving people things that are worth them paying a small amount of money to support. That they want, and you know, make them like you enough to where they will do that. So focus constantly on improving the quality of what you're putting out, and then you want to give people a mixture of free things that can you know, get them acquainted with you and get them to like you, and then paid stuff that they will want to pay money to access. So we don't have a paywall for anything on our website, but we have a print edition, and the print edition is paid for. So people like the stuff on the website, and then they pay for the print edition because they want more. This is kind of the same model that Chapo Trap House has become very successful on Patreon using, which is a free episode every week and paywall stuff. And so people listen to the free episode, they really like it, and then they see that there's a paid episode for subscribers, and it's only $5 a month, so they pay, and then they get the paid stuff. And by doing that, you are able to build as I say, it doesn't take that many people, a few hundred, a few thousand, and it's a very big world. There's billions of people in the world, so it is possible to financially, and unfortunately, I mean, I'm focusing on the kind of business aspect of it, which feels a little crude, but being financially sustainable is the number one first thing, which is you have to be able to pay for people's labor. We pay for all the writing and the art, and I don't want to ever have unpaid interns. So a lot of our focus has to be on how do we keep enough money coming through the door each month to where we can pay for all the work. And so you want to keep your costs as low as possible. We didn't have an office for the first few years. It was just me in my living room. I was the only full-time staff person because I wanted to use the money that we had to pay for more writing and more art, because the content is what drives the subscriptions. And I would say focus less on advertising, marketing, focus more on paying for really good things that people will want, and that are useful to them, and that they like. And if you do that, it is very possible to build the kind of audience that will allow you to sustain a small project and grow slowly.
Thank you very much.
We have Rogelio next up on Stack.
Hello. So, hi. So I want to ask a question. We mentioned earlier about problems we have in South Florida, and I wanted to elaborate on the population from Cuba and Venezuela. I just wanted to ask what specific for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, please.
To see if what your opinion is on the governments in Cuba and Venezuela, if socialist organizations should critically support those governments, dealing with people that might have problems with those governments, because me personally, my parents came from Cuba, and they would have some disagreements, and that's kind of a conflict I have to go through, especially when I talk about politics with them. So I wanted to see if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I approach leftist governments generally, or governments that are called socialist governments, is to say, well, okay, I support these governments to the extent that they embody democratic socialist values, and I don't to the extent that they don't. So, obviously there are features of the Cuban Revolution and of Castro's governance that I think actually are very positive, right? They're positive changes, right? The healthcare and literacy, these are things that are, there are many attempts to diminish these achievements, but they are demonstrable improvements in the welfare of the country that came about because of an egalitarian commitment on behalf of the government. On the other hand, I think there is a lot of evidence that the Castro government's approach to, for example, homosexuality in the 60s, was, imprisoning a lot of people, was very backwards and horrible. And that at the same, and I am a libertarian socialist. I believe in a maximum possible freedoms of speech. I'm a prison abolitionist, so I don't like governments that I don't like the death penalty. So when governments use the death penalty or the prison system, these things horrify and disturb me. And I think, we can have a nuanced perspective, right? And the same with the Venezuelan government. Me being a socialist means that I can respect anti-poverty programs by a socialist government without endorsing economic mismanagement, and that I can separate those two things in my mind. That I can say, that I think I can criticize incompetence or corruption in the Maduro administration, but I can also say that United States sanctions are clearly contributing to the squeezing and destruction of the Venezuelan economy as well, and that I think if we try and break people out of the thank you. If we try and break people out of the binary of, and I think I use the same approach to the Soviet Union, right? Which is, I find the Great Purge under Stalin to be one of the great historic atrocities. At the same time, I also recognize that without the Soviet Union, the Allies would have lost World War II. I recognize that there was a phenomenal achievement in going from a peasant society in 1917 to winning the space race in the 1950s. And these are things that an intelligent person can recognize these distinctions. And so I think getting people out of the first, like, is it or is it not socialist question, where you say, is this government socialist? If it is a government socialist, then we, the socialists, are defending everything that government does. And if it's not if it's not socialist, then we can't have credit for anything that it does. And I think we take the same approach to China, which calls itself a socialist country, and which clearly many of its achievements are because it has many state-run enterprises and a very sort of state-driven economy, which has in part been part of the reason why the economy has been so successful. And we can recognize that, but we can also recognize that we're anti-authoritarians. So. Yeah, I think if you have intelligent conversations with people about what socialist values are and whether you think that, and not wanting to defend absolutely any government and not wanting to condemn or disown a government that is committed to anti-imperialism, for example, then hopefully we can get past solve a few of the difficulties in these conversations.
Anon is up on Stack.
Oh, hi again. So I wanted to follow up what was said earlier about media and sort of building a left-wing media for non-leftists. The first thing I guess I don't think, maybe you're not the right person to ask, but the first thing I thought of was Teen Vogue, which has put out a lot of anti-capitalist literature, but it's in the past few years, but it's still very much a teen fashion magazine. And I'm wondering the backstory behind that. It's like if there's like some way to take over these existing institutions, or rather than try to build something brand new.
Yeah. I mean, the Teen Vogue example is great. I part of why they're able to do it is because the Zoomer generation to which they appeal it tends to be anti-capitalist already. So I doubt that Condé Nast would be as tolerant of a Teen Vogue editor who was trying to inject anti-capitalism into the magazine if it were true that that was seriously jeopardizing the readership numbers. So that we can find these strange points at which, like, socialism is in the short term almost profitable for individual capitalist institutions, right? So, like, Fox News recognizes that it can get ratings by putting Bernie on, even though in the long term, if Bernie wins, that is not in the interest of Fox News. But because a lot of capitalists think in the short term, we can sometimes pull this off. My socialism book is published by Macmillan, who are a giant evil publishing house, and I recognize that it's not because they care about socialism, it's because they care about selling books. And if socialist books are what people want, then all of a sudden, Macmillan are going to start putting out socialist books because they don't want to lose sales. In the long term, this will not work. All right, we can take over some institutions, but as we know, ultimately you have to restructure who is in power, because they are going to figure out, and Condé Nast is not going to improve as an institution because Teen Vogue puts out anti-capitalist articles. And ultimately, the structure of who owns Teen Vogue is going to have to change, because they might continue to put out anti-capitalist articles, but they're not going to be a socialist institution, because they still operate in the interests of Condé Nast shareholders, and there's almost this perverse thing where their socialism is a product. It's being sold. It's because advertisers can sell young teenagers makeup by hooking them with socialism or whatever. I'm not sure what the ads on the Teen Vogue website are, but whatever the ads are, that's what they're actually trying to do by putting out these articles. Maybe not the editor. The editor is clearly a sincere and passionate anti-capitalist, but ultimately they are embedded within an institution whose drive is to serve Condé Nast shareholders. So I think it is always important to keep that in mind, even as we do our best to kind of take over institutions, that ultimately as socialists, we know that we have to restructure ownership and who's in charge and in whose interests institutions operate.
Thanks. I think Stack is cleared. We're at time. It's 4:16, 4 minutes away from 4:20. Nice. Can Nathan take any more questions or comments? Are you free to take if anyone has?
Yeah, if anyone has anything else.
Yeah, if anyone wants to jump in. Nick, yep.
Hey, thanks for coming, Nathan. I just want to give a quick comment on one thing I like about current affairs is that you have a frivolity section and it's a little more fun. I'm more like a Jacobin reader, but there's Jacobin. It's not to just generalize, but it's people who are really into history and maybe people reading about World War II, and it's kind of a different. I like that there's emerging different kind of channels to get people into socialism, because it's you're kind of assessing somebody who you're trying to move to your side, and you're like, what media are you going to send them to?
Yeah.
And so I that's one thing I appreciate about current affairs is there's some fun elements to it. It's not just all serious and dour, leftists can tend to be. So that's one thing I like about your operation.
Well, thanks, Nick. I think that's there is a theory behind it, right? It is, as you say, I love Jacobin. We have a great relationship with Jacobin. We don't see ourselves as competitors in any way. But we put out a book. We put out a book called The Current Affairs Book of Amusements, and it's full of fake board games and comics and things to cut out. But all of those things are implicitly, for the most part, some of them are just weird, but some of them are pieces of socialist propaganda in many ways. And the point is that we are trying to convey the same ideas in as many ways as possible. And so I think that is a really important thing to understand, is that we are not just limited to holding signs and handing out pamphlets. And we need to figure out and that's why the Teen Vogue thing is cool as well. We just recorded for Current Affairs YouTube channel a socialist cooking show. And it's a very serious introduction to how to cook. But we use cooking to talk about authority and hierarchy. And we talk about how to, we talk, and the politics of food, right? And so the cooking show, we're hoping, will attract a lot of people who just want to learn how to cook. But then over the course of it, it's going to have all these discussions of things that are going to get them thinking about the implicit politics underlying this seemingly apolitical looking thing. We have an article in our new issue about socialism and fashion. And so, there are lots of ways to take you can make a socialist superhero movie. You can write a socialist fantasy story. And it doesn't have to be obviously propaganda, but it can be built on it can have implicitly this set of values, and I think that is really, really, truly helpful. And I appreciate you saying that, because it is part of what we're trying to do, is to say, well, someone just laughed at this comic that we put out, but the reason they laughed is because they recognized a core political or economic truth that was embedded in it.
Thank you. Floor is open again, and it's good to know my screenplay in which a man is visited by Marx in his sleep and is driven to fight crime and take down the system is a good idea. Steve?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for being our speaker today. This is my first live meeting at DSA, and it's really it's been super informative. I've taken 6 pages of notes here, So I mean, I really the way you've displayed your arguments and your conclusions, it's helped me answer some of the questions that I've had, and some of the work through some of the thoughts I've had in presenting conversations to people I know to help the DSA movement. So I really appreciate you coming today.
Well, thanks. It's been great to be with you all. If any of you think of questions that you have after the fact, I am Nathan at currentaffairs.org. I'm slow to reply to emails, but I promise I will. And if I don't, just follow up. But I love talking to you all.
We have